Okay. Good morning and welcome back to social psychology. I wish all of you a very happy new year and all the best of luck and success in 2014. Before I start with talking about aggression, let's spend a few minutes on the students' evaluation of this lecture. As you can see, on the quantitative dimensions, almost all questions were answered quite positively. So almost all of those 24 students who have participated in the evaluation before Christmas agreed that there's a constructive positive climate, that there's a red line to find between lectures. You also agree that students are encouraged to work with the material, that the structure is okay, etc., etc. Thank you very much. Okay, let's talk about the multiple choice questions from the session before Christmas. Before Christmas, we talked about intergroup behavior. And one question was people's perceived discrepancy between attainments and expectations, between what they get and what they expect to get, refers to an outcome of power hierarchies in capitalist societies, a necessary precondition of group violence, the concept of relative deprivation, or an unbalanced triad. Any ideas? Yes, please.
Concept of relative deprivation.
Thank you. Relative deprivation. 96% of those who participated got this one correct. Any questions? Anything unclear? It can be a precondition of group violence, but it's not a necessary precondition of group violence. Remember, we talked about social identity and that the sheer categorization into group A and group B, Clare and Kandinsky, already leads people to favor the in-group and discriminate against the out-group or devalue the out-group. So it may be a precondition of group violence, but it's not a necessary precondition. Sharif believed that intergroup harmony can turn into conflict and then ethnocentrism when an authoritarian leader comes to power, when groups compete for scarce resources, when the temperatures rise, or when one group notices that another group exists. Yeah.
I would say no, not the groups compete
Yes.
for. Yeah, it wasn't the test A. Not
When groups compete for scarce resources, correct, yes. And 96% of the fellow students also got this one right. Now we come to social identity approach. Social categorization refers to the attitude that precedes discrimination, a process associated with realistic group conflict theory, collective attribution, or the process of classifying people as members of different social groups. Yes, please. Thank you very much. And everyone got this one right. I'm not sure whether this is the first time that we got 100% correct response, but so I will probably not ask this question in the exam. Social identity should become more positive through each of A, social competition, social creativity, or individual mobility, social castes, ideologies, or a feudal system, individual competition, individual creativity, or individual mobility, or social competition, individual creativity, and social isolation. Moritz, wolltest du? Ach so, du. Yes, please. Social competition, social creativity, and individual mobility. So when the individual experiences that they suffer from a negative social identity, when you are a member of a low status group, women, for example, then what can you do? You can either try to individually move into the higher status group, executive women or men or whatever. If that is not possible because women hardly can become male, then social competition or social creativity helps enhance one's group status. When you compare with groups that are even lower in status, foreigners living in Germany, for example, or when you re-evaluate the dimensions of comparison. Yes, we are not doing so well economically, but we look nicer or better or whatever. Or social competition, some social competition when there are cognitive alternatives and when the system is perceived to be illegitimate and unstable. And we have seen that in the 1960s and 1970s when the feminist movement was quite successfully challenging the whole system and engaged in social competition. 96% of everyone got this right. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. So when I don't have the option to move into the other group, when there's impermeability of group boundaries, and when I cannot imagine that we can overcome the system because we see it as very stable and also somewhat legitimate, then we engage in social creativity, which means we can either change the comparison group, so as a member of a low status group in comparison with a high status group, I can switch the comparison group from the high status group into a group that is even lower in one status. Or I can change the dimension on which I compare with the other group. So I can, for example, say, okay, we don't compare on the economic basis, but we compare on social dimensions. I can trivialize the status differentials, or I can re-evaluate the status dimension. I can just say, okay, we are not doing so well economically, but economic success is not everything, and economic success is also an expression of being selfish, etc. Okay? So, some terms. I also sometimes use these lists, so I didn't know the term precipitate when I prepared for this lecture again. I think it's a relatively uncommon term, precipitate. I also forgot what thwarting or to thwart someone meant, but now you know what it means. I would like you to discuss for a moment this question. Do you think that computer games that portray violence, ego shooters, for example, make people more aggressive? Or do you think they help people to work off their frustrations? Or do you think they have no effect at all because people are aggressive and some people are more aggressive and others are less aggressive, irrespectively of whether they play computer games or not? Discuss with the 2 or 3 people around you for 1 minute. Okay, thank you very much. How many of you think that playing violent computer games does not have an effect on people's aggressiveness at all? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you think it helps people because it gets them steam off their frustrations? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You are studying informatics. You want to sell these games, I guess. And I assume the rest thinks that playing violent computer games can make people more aggressive. I will explore this with you in a moment. I will show you some research evidence and also some theoretical input into why I believe the latter is true as well. So in general, today we will consider why people aggress against each other. We will focus on the role of both social and biosocial factors. We talk a little bit about definitions of aggression. When I show you some of the experiments, we will also see how people typically measure people's aggression in the laboratory or in the field. We talk about major theories of why people aggress, some contributing factors. I will also talk about mass media effects, and then finally, how can we reduce aggression? Aggression has been defined in many different terms, and typically the differences between definitions reflect the theoretical approaches of the people who propose the definition. But the definition on which modern social psychologists by and large agree is the following. An aggressive action is intentional behavior aimed at causing either physical or psychological pain of another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment. So when I incidentally slip my remote control and hit her, I would inflict physical damage on her, but it would not be aggression because it's not an intentional behavior. I didn't throw it at her to cause harm, with a motivation to cause harm on her. If I would throw the remote at her, but will not hit her, but miss her, it would still be aggression because it's intentional behavior aimed at causing physical or psychological damage. The deed itself, whether I'm successful or not, is not relevant. Relevant is my intention. Why do you think is it important to add this final statement? Who is motivated to avoid such treatment? Why do we need this? Can you imagine a situation where one person does something that inflicts harm on another person and that would not count as aggression? Yes, please.
Maybe tattoos, piercing, because the person wants the violence or the pain, and therefore it's not really aggression, but just a favor.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
It's not aggression, but
No, the first part.
tattoos or piercings. I mean, this is also kind of violent or aggressive maybe towards the person.
Yeah. Tattoos or piercing, yes, but I think the person who does the piercing doesn't have the intention anyway.
Oh, yes.
So we wouldn't need the letter statement. There was another suggestion, yes, please.
Maybe in sports, if you in boxing or kickboxing, both try to hurt each other.
Mm-hmm. That's a delicate problem. So boxing. In boxing, obviously, one person has the aim to hurt someone else, and the other person obviously also had the motivation to avoid this treatment. The question here is whether there's really the intention to inflict physical or psychological pain of another living. Is that really the aim of the opponents in the boxing ring? I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, yes, it does belong to the type of sports that you hit someone, but it's not the intention to cause pain on him. It's yeah. But it's debatable, at least, and there is a debate of whether boxing, kickboxing, other martial arts are problematic from this point of view. Yes, please.
There are some sexual practices.
Yes, sexual practices, sadomasochism.
But the question is the aim to cause pain, or is the final aim to cause pleasure?
Who has experience with these practices? I don't have first-hand experience, but this is a typical example that we find in the textbooks. And again, it's maybe a little bit similar to the boxing event. Is the aim really to inflict pain because the one who may have this intention knows that the more pain they deliver, the more pleasure they cause in the other person? Maybe. I don't know. We can differentiate between two types of aggression. Hostile aggression is an act of aggression stemming from feelings of anger and is aimed at inflicting pain in the first place. Instrumental aggression, on the other hand, is aggression that serves as a means to some goal rather than causing pain. And obviously we can take the boxing example, and this would fit to instrumental aggression. It's not the boxer's or the opponent's first aim to cause pain, but they want to reach the goal of winning the competition. There are biological and social theories of aggression. Biological explanations can be traced back to Darwin, include the views of Freud, ethological theory, Konrad Lorenz, for example, and more recently also evolutionary social psychology. These approaches emphasize genetically determined behavior patterns that are shared by a species. So there are some species who are more aggressive, other species who are completely violence-free, and man falls somewhere in between. But these theories all emphasize that there is a genetic basis for aggressive behavior. Social explanations, on the other hand, usually stress the role of societal influence and or learning processes. Some of these theories incorporate biological components as well. We will see in a moment excitation transfer theory or frustration aggression hypotheses. These have some biological components but stress the situational influence. Social learning theory is a developmental approach that stresses reinforcement principles and the influence that models have on the young child. Wer von den Schülern hat schon mal von Albert Bandura gehört? Ja? Okay. Ich zeige Ihnen gleich mal einen Film. Albert Bandura is the founder of social learning theory, and he has invented a paradigm to study aggression in the laboratory, and he was interested in role modeling, and I'll show you a little video in a moment. I just wanted to check whether this is common knowledge already or not. So excitation transfer theory is one example of these theories on the interface between biological and social explanations. This was proposed by Dolph Zillman at the end of the 1970s. And an example would be that you would work out at a gym. This leads to a high rate of excitation, so your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your muscle tremor is still higher than usual for a while after you have finished exercising. So this may last for half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, 20 minutes, whatever, depending on how hard you exercise. This effect lasts, and when there are social factors, social influences that serve as cues or stimuli, then people respond with aggression. So if the student works out at a gym and 20 minutes later tries to park his car in a restaurant's parking lot and a motorist takes the last available space, then the student is more likely to respond with aggression than if this residual excitation would not be present. So this is a theory that takes some biological explanations into account, but emphasizes that without situational cues, situational influences, there would be less aggression or no aggression. So the question is aggression inborn? Do we all have the potential for aggression when we see the light of our world, such as Anne 4 weeks ago? 4 weeks? Or is it learned? Do we learn aggression as young children, as adolescents? Do we learn it from observing our peers, from being rewarded or punished by our parents, teachers, etc.? Freud postulated that humans have innate instincts towards life, inborn instincts. Eros, on the one hand, this is our drive, our instinct to have sex, to reproduce our species, and thanatos, our instinct towards death and destruction that leads to aggression. If there is such an innate factor that every human has when they come to, when they are born, then we should also be able to trace some elements of it in our biological makeup. And the amygdala is an area in the core of our brain that has been associated with aggressive behavior. So it has been found that when people watch aggressive media, or when they act aggressively themselves, or when they have to think about aggression, then the amygdala is more active. However, even if the amygdala is directly stimulated, not necessarily do people aggress, but whether they aggress or not, it depends again on situational factors. So there seems to be some biological basis, but there seems to be also, again, social situational influences that mean people learn when to aggress and how to aggress. The amygdala is also responsible for two transmitters, serotonin and testosterone. Serotonin is a chemical that may inhibit our aggressive impulses. Testosterone is a male sex hormone associated with higher aggression. And a wide variety of studies has indeed shown that men are more aggressive than women are. And also some studies, for example, in prisons have shown that inmates typically have more male sexual hormones like testosterone, that they more often have genetic aberrations. In female prisons, for example, female prisoners more likely have genetic aberrations that give them more Y chromosomes or more Y genes and make them more male in some ways. However, the research is again quite complex. For example, women can be as aggressive as men, but typically aggression in the laboratory or in the field is observed as physical aggression. Women have been found to be more verbally aggressive than men. So it's probably also a question of what is societally normative, what is allowed, what is the norm. So it depends on situational and cultural factors. Some research into the causes of aggression has concentrated on factors in the person, such as personality, or as I just said, gender. Other work has looked at transitory states, states that can go away, that come and go away quite quickly. For example, the experience of frustration, the role of catharsis, the effects of provocation or alcohol, the role of brain injury or mental illness, or the experience of disinhibition. I will show you some examples of some of these factors in a moment. Other studies have focused on situational factors, so stresses in the physical environment, heat, crowding. I think we already discussed the long hot summer explanation of race riots in the United States when we talk about temperatures much higher than 35 to 40 degrees Celsius over a long period of time, and in crowded neighborhoods people tend to become aggressive, and this together with some feelings of relative deprivation leads to frustration, and this can lead to aggression. Major societal variable is perceived disadvantage, that is relative deprivation as we discussed it. And a social approach to aggression allows for the possibility of change in patterns over time and cultural context. Aggression is increasing in women, for example. Rates of physical aggression may vary across cultures, which reflect long-standing norms, standards, values. Let's look at the effect of alcohol. Alcohol can serve as a disinhibitor that leads people to be more likely to commit actions that are normally frowned upon by society. So normally the society does not like people to be or behave aggressively, but alcohol serves as a disinhibiting factor. And this was an experiment by Taylor and Sears in 1988. Typical experimental setup, two participants played against each other, and the winning partner could always determine the strength of an electric shock that the losing partner would get after each block. In fact, it was always the experimenter who determined the level of shock, and it was always a very mild shock. So in no instance any severe shocks were administered. In the first block, there was no situational cue or no social pressure. In the second block, a confederate of the experimenter, who allegedly was another research participant waiting in the room, told the real participant, "Oh, why don't you give him a little bit of a shock?" In the third block, he gave him a strong suggestion to shock the other person. So the degree of social pressure now was much higher. And in the fourth block again, there was no social pressure by the other participants. So here in the third block, this confederate of the experimenter always said, oh, now I would really shock this guy. As you can see, in the placebo condition, before the experiment, participants received a drink and thought it was alcohol, but in the placebo condition, there was no alcohol in the drink at all. And you can see that aggression goes a little bit up in the strong social pressure situation. In the alcohol condition, you see a different pattern. Already in the mild shock or in the mild social pressure condition, 20% of participants used a strong shock against the other person. And in the strong social pressure condition, 60% used a strong shock. And this went down again in the fourth block when the social pressure was removed or eliminated. So you can see that alcohol serves as a disinhibiting factor. Already when there's some mild understanding from the environment that aggression would be okay, and particularly so when people know that it was socially approved of to shock the other person. So it's a combination of biological, alcohol, disinhibiting factor, and social environment. Yes, please.
Can you talk of an after effect of this social pressure? Because in the fourth block, where the social pressure was none again, it was much higher than in the mild social pressure condition. So is this to be seen as an after effect of the third block?
Yeah, the social pressure in a way had been, at least in the alcohol condition, but also, as you can see, in the placebo condition as well, because it maintained a little bit a higher level than in the mild and in the no social pressure condition. So maybe the social pressure, the norm of giving a strong shock developed by the researchers confederate led to an internalization of this norm. And this was maintained and led to slightly higher shocks here compared to this condition and higher shocks here compared to these two conditions. Yes? I think I already mentioned this study by Leon Mann, who was shocked to read in a newspaper that a suicidal jumper on a tall building in New York was cheered and applauded by a crowd waiting on the pavement, and they started shouting, "Jump, jump, jump." This is called the biting crowd. And then Leon Mann studied 21 accounts of suicidal jumpers in the recent past and found 10 instances of a biting crowd in these 21 cases. So in almost 50% of these instances of suicidal jumpers from tall buildings, a biting crowd was around. And then he looked more closely into what differentiated the 50% with a biting crowd present from the other 50%. And what he found was situational factors like a long wait, nighttime, a large crowd when there were more than 300 people around, and the distance from the victim were all factors that led to a higher likelihood of biting behavior. And he thought, or he suggested, that nighttime, a large group of people, a distance from the victim, all led to more anonymity and lower concern for the victim, led to de-individuation and more of this terrible behavior. And the long wait leads to irritability and frustration that makes it more likely that people behave aggressive, and the baiting behavior is just one example, one terrible example of people behaving aggressively. I mentioned temperature again. This is a typical finding. Cohn and Rotten looked at assaults and the outside temperature across a number of years and across a number of cities in the United States. And they found this inverted U-shaped curve. So this was a pattern that they observed, and the blue line is the fitted curve that explained the data best. So there seems to be a positive relationship between temperature and aggression, but only up to a certain point. When the temperature rises above 29, 30 degrees, then there's a drop again in aggression. So there seems to be a limit when people, because of the too high temperature, become inactive in a way, become more passive, and then assault rates go a little bit down again. So the pattern is an inverted U-shaped curve that we often find in psychology. We often don't find strict linear relationships. If we see correlations of 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, there may be an underlying inverted U-shaped correlation that in the extremes, too high a level in one variable starts causing the other variable to go down again, although the linear relationship is what is most important, because temperatures typically vary between, say, -4 and 28 or 25 degrees on a day's average temperature, say, in Germany, and they hardly go above 40 degrees here in Germany, and also rarely go down below -15 on days averages. Yes, please.
Could this effect be also due to just less people being outside with lower temperatures?
And more people being on the outside when the temperature gets a little bit warmer or quite comfortable. Yes, and it can also we can also combine this study or this effect with the previous slide on alcohol. So when people are outside and when it's warmer, then people typically also consume more alcohol. Mm-hmm. Frustration and aggression. The first frustration-aggression hypothesis by Dollard, Miller, Maurer, and Dope in 1939 proposed that every aggressive act is caused by a frustration, and every frustration causes aggressive act. And this theory had been modified by Leonard Berkowitz. Berkowitz is one of the most important aggression researchers in the United States, who did most of his work in the 1960s and 70s. And he said in his cognitive neo-associationistic approach to aggression that frustration can be one element that leads to aggression, but it does not necessarily lead to aggression. And there are also aggression or aggressive acts that are not preceded by frustration. But frustration-aggression theory says that frustration, which is the perception that you are being prevented from obtaining a goal, will increase the likelihood of an aggressive response. And the closer we come to achieving our goal, the greater is the frustration when we are thwarted, and the higher the probability that the person will indeed respond with some aggression. Aggression also increases when the frustration is unexpected, when we are really close to a goal and we had never thought of anyone taking it away from us, then we are more likely to respond with aggression. Then we had already in our back of our minds that there are other people who compete for the resource, and that it might still be the case that we lose the race. People usually feel the need to reciprocate after they are provoked by aggressive behavior from another person. So typically, we have the societal norm. We have learned as very young children that it's okay to retaliate. When someone hurts us, then we should also hurt him, or it's more okay to hurt the other person. If, however, we think that the provocation was unintentional, we are also unlikely to reciprocate, also because we have learned that this is not approved of. If there are mitigating circumstances, we may not aggress, but the circumstances, of course, have been known at the time of the aggression. And Leonard Berkowitz also invented or made up the term the weapons effect. He came up with the theory that there are aggressive objects in our environment that can serve as aggressive cues. And when we are frustrated, or when when we are provoked, or when we are feeling relatively deprived, or when the temperature is too hot, etc., etc., then aggressive stimuli in the environment that are associated with aggressive responses, for example, a gun, and whose mere presence increases the probability that people aggress. And the typical study, Berkowitz and Lepage in 1967, is that you come into the laboratory, you are told to write a short essay about something, and you are told that in the room next door there's another research participant who also writes an essay. Then the essays are swapped, and you as a participant should read the essay of the other participant and give a brief evaluation. So what would you typically do? You would say, yeah, it was interesting, it was okay, or I didn't like it, but it was written very nicely, or whatever. You would typically not make extreme critical statements. Why would you? This is not the norm in our society. You don't know the other person, the essay is quite okay, and so would be your essay. It would be okay, whatever you write, because the researcher told you to write an essay about whatever everyday topic, it would be okay. But then the essays are swapped again, and you see the evaluation of the other person. The other person obviously is a confederate of the experimenter, it's not a real participant, and this other person notes on your essay, this is the worst essay I've ever written, I've ever read, it's all complete bullshit, I don't like it. So how would you feel? You would feel angry, you would feel provoked. And now the experimenter says to you, oh, and now we are doing some other stuff. For example, we are tasting some new food, some nutrition, some fluids, whatever. This wasn't done by Berkowitz and Lepage, but it's one of my favorite measures of aggression in the laboratory, and it's called the hot sauce paradigm. So the experimenter gives you a tiny sample of an extremely spicy sauce, some Tabasco, and you are asked to try to drink it, and then the experimenter tells you, okay, and now you can determine how much of this sauce the other person in the next room should drink. You can fill the glass up to the rim, the other person has to drink it. I think Berkowitz and Lepage used electric shocks. In other experiments, ice water is a nice thing. If you hold your hands in ice water, it's extremely cold. We typically don't like this. It's inflicting pain of us. And again, you have the opportunity as a participant to say how long should the other person keep his hands in the ice-cold water. And what is typically found in these experiments is when there's a gun in the room, when there's a gun lying on a table next to the participant, people are much more likely to respond with aggression. In the original experiment, you see that the average duration of shocks administered by angry subjects. So when there was a badminton racket in the room, aggression was much lower. The provocation was the same negative statements on your essay, same outcome measure, or same measure of aggressiveness, but the gun in the room suffices to make it twice more likely that you respond with aggression, or make it your aggressive act twice as harmful to the other participant. Now, in Germany, I was always asking myself, is it possible to do the same experiment? What would you think if you come to the social psychology department in the Peck building and you see a gun lying on the table? You would either laugh at us, or you would run out of the room as fast as you can. But I don't think such an experiment is possible anymore. So what we used when we did a similar experiment last semester was pictures of aggressive movies, like Kill Bill versus Bambi. And we found a similar effect. So we still, and I think some people in this room ran these experiments. Yes, please.
Yeah, what do you want from me?
No. Nothing, but some.
You were asking about if we participated in this experiment.
Yeah, yeah, and I think here too as well. So some people participated in this experiment. So for for the school students, we still run experiments like these because sometimes we want to confirm, does this effect still exist? Does this effect exist in other cultures? Does this effect exist but with different situational cues? So Berkowitz in 1967 could use guns because guns seem to be a completely different topic in the United States. And you may have seen the movie Bowling for Columbine, for example. I show you some slides now that are not intended to ridicule people in the US. And I'm not saying that US Americans are more aggressive than Germans. I'm also not saying that every American owns a gun. I know many American colleagues, and I don't know anyone who possesses a gun. But apparently gun possession is much more likely in the United States than in Germany. And often researchers have used this as one of the factors that contribute to the widespread aggression in the United States. This is from Facebook. The US has 5% of the world's population, but account for half of all firearms worldwide, and 80% of gun deaths in the 23 richest countries. Last year, this was in 2012, last year handguns killed 48 people in Japan, 8 in Great Britain, 34 in Switzerland, 52 in Canada, 58 in Israel, 21 in Sweden, 41 in West Germany, 10,728 in the United States. Obviously, the population of the United States is far larger than in any of these countries, but the United States have a population of about 350 million people, and taken the population of these countries together is maybe 200 million, and you see a vast difference. And this is not an this was not an exceptional year, but you see between 1980 and 2000, the number of homicides by weapon type is always around something like 10,000 per year. Homicide by handguns. And now, again, not to ridicule any colleagues in the United States or anyone in America, but in the Sunday Times magazine in 2007, I found the following photographs of ordinary people in the US. And I'm only showing this to you to say that weapons and guns apparently have a different status in the US than they have in Germany. I'm showing you 4 or 5 photographs where ordinary people in the US pose with their weapons. And again, I'm not saying that every American has a weapon, quite the contrary, but more people in the US own handguns, and it seems culturally far more approved of to show them. And you know of the debates every time when there's some school shooting in the US, when there's some catastrophe, someone running amok in a city or a school or a nursery, wherever. There's always a debate in the United States. Should we have stronger laws against possession of weapons or not? And the problem seems to be that the American Rifle Association is quite a strong lobby and prevents American presidents and American Congress from more stricter laws. Everyone in the US, or almost everyone, can buy guns quite easily, and so they are more available, and so they may serve as aggressive cues much more often than they do in all these other countries. Yes, please.
I mean, and this is one thing to have the, I mean, I think the higher rate of homicides in the US is more caused by the availability of the gun, like you said, that it can get to the hands of the people who is, let's say, more aggressive or more likely to use it. But I would not necessarily say that the theory is, because of that, correct, because the cues of having the guns, for example, example, are the one that making people more aggressive. I will not find that the people there is more aggressive than here. I mean, I have colleagues also who even posted pictures of their children with potato guns and whatever. Yeah, I mean, I do not consider him to be more aggressive than a normal person that I know. I mean, this is just a hobby.
Yeah, I think it's a variety of reasons. So one reason might be there are just guns available, and so people use them. If there is a robbery, then if guns are available, then these guns are more used. When no guns are available, the likelihood that someone gets killed is a little bit lower. It also shows a certain societal climate, and in the United States also there's a difference between the South and the North of the United States. In the South there's more a culture where retaliation after provocation is the norm, and it's okay. And when people also wear their guns more openly than they do in the North of the United States. But according to Berkowitz, the sheer likelihood that people sometimes see guns lying around, standing somewhere, makes it also more likely that people use aggression, not necessarily with guns, but use aggression when they are provoked. And obviously the likelihood is higher when guns are present in a society than when they are not present. Because, I mean, guns, and particularly these types of guns, are clearly aggressive cues. Yes, please. In the US? I'm not sure. As I said, there is a difference between the North and the South in the United States. I'm not sure. I simply don't know. I think there should be some differences, but I'm not familiar with the research on ethnic groups or gender groups or old and young or societal classes, etc. Sorry. Yes, please.
Since you said these types of guns are very aggressive cue, I guess it hasn't been tested whether I've seen these on the internet. There are actually Hello Kitty miniaturized guns for kids in the US. Are there studies whether these cues are as aggressive cues because they are a weapon, or whether the pink color and the Hello Kitty counterfeit does something to that?
I'm not sure whether there are studies, and I'm also not sure whether every gun automatically makes an aggressive cue. Also, the children's play guns that we grew up with, playing cowboy and native Indian also, whether they necessarily make aggressive cues, but what they typically also do is demonstrate to the young child that it's okay to shoot someone else as long as it's just play, that it is okay to make loud noise that may hurt other people, etc. And I think we should carefully consider to what extent we apply these things and we allow children to play with them. Yeah, but I'm not sure about studies on these types of toy weapons. Imitation and aggression. And now we come to Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura in 1961 demonstrated social learning theory. That is a theory that we learn social behavior and also quite complex behavior, such as aggression, by observing others and then imitating them. In their studies, children watch an adult play quietly with tinker toys and either play aggressively with a Bobo doll or ignore the Bobo doll. Children who saw the model play aggressively with Bobo were subsequently more aggressive when they also left in the playroom with this Bobo. And particularly so when the model was rewarded, when it was of the same sex as the child, or when it had a nurturing relationship, so was a parent or was a teacher